Thank you. Governor?
Well, I think in the essence of your question, Doug, was to share some perspectives about, DJ, the things that are cold truths or hard truths that people need to hear, and that's a mark of leadership. And one thing I think we have to be very candid about is the massive, profound economic transformation that is sweeping the globe and impacting the United States of America. You know, one generation ago when you grew up in South St. Paul, where I grew up, if you were my mom or my dad or my grandma or my grandpa, if you didn't have a skill or an education, there was still a big safety net amongst the government, in addition to the government programs, called the strong back job. And as long as you weren't disabled, even if you were disengaged, disinterested, disinclined, disrespected, whatever, you could still go use your strong back to make a living and get by with a job that had decent wages and benefits. Those jobs are harder and harder to come by if the only proposition you have to the marketplace is I have just a strong back. We have to have, even in the most basic of jobs now, skills that are relevant to the economy of the future. And so we have to tell our citizens that it's not okay that 30% of our kids nationally are dropping out of high school. We do better in Minnesota, but that's what Time Magazine said is a national average. There's a profound truth underneath all of that. The number one correlation of how kids are going to do is their parents. And there's some parents who can't, won't, refuse, don't, decline, whatever, and we need to step in and help. But we also need to have a very hard discussion and very difficult discussion and say, as a society, not just from government, but community leaders, faith leaders, neighborhood leaders, nonprofit leaders, we need to have a call to another level of parenting responsibility. And we have way too many kids who have parents who are checked out, or worse yet, abusive, neglectful, or problematic. And so there's programs to help, but beyond that, we need to have a community statement, a cultural statement that says that's not okay. We need to support, but we also need to encourage, and that's a truth that doesn't get laid out very candidly or bluntly in much of the discourse.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hutchinson.
One of the main jobs of a leader is to manage the attention of people. You know, we can choose to pay attention to all kinds of things, and one of the jobs is to keep people focused on the main things that matter most to the future of our state. And I think if you look back over the last few years, you've got to ask yourself, what were those main things? Well, interestingly enough, there's 7 of them, and they all begin with G. Guns, gay marriage, God, gambling, gynecology, green cards, and stadiums for gladiators. Those are the things that we were told we should pay attention to. Those are the things that were at the top of the agenda. Those were the main things. And I think they were the wrong things. Not because they aren't important issues, they're incredibly important issues on which we'll quickly divide. But while we're divided and paralyzed and our attention is distracted, we never get to health care. When's the health care session going to be? When's someone going to call one? When's the education session going to happen? When are we really going to get focused on changing what needs to change in education? Are we going to have a transportation session? I mean, we have a 20-year backlog because for 20 years, people in the legislature and the governor couldn't agree, including, well, Tim Pawlenty, who ran a big chunk of the legislature for those years. And the environment's a mess. When are we going to have the environmental session? When are we going to make those main things the main thing? When are we going to get them on the top of the agenda where they belong? That's a leader's job. You can't duck these issues. You can't walk away and you can't distract the people of Minnesota forever. And what's happening in this election year, and I think more profoundly across the country, is that people are realizing how they've been manipulated by this politics, how they've been manipulated by issues on which they feel very strongly to distract their attention from the issues in which they have the highest stake. And we just can't allow that anymore.
Thank you.
Well, I agree with Peter that I was thinking of the memo that was written by the National Republican Party about the idea that this year don't talk about issues, get personal, get dirty, get divisive, and do whatever it takes to win. And I look at what's going on and some of the issues that Peter brought up, and I'm sure we're going to be hearing more about that in October. I'd like to point out one item about balancing the budget, and the idea of making it better for the next generation, the idea of building a middle class. One thing that's in common between the federal and state government right now The federal deficit is for our children. We don't care. We'll take it for ourselves. We'll stick it to them. Medicare, Social Security, we do the same. State Highway Fund, let's borrow. Who cares? Stick it to our children. Somebody's going to have to pay it. K through 12 education, we had to balance the budget. Well, let's take it out on the kids. First time in state history we ever froze the education budget. And in college tuition, which offends me greatly, I was able to go to college, first my family would be able to go. And I went because Elmer Anderson and Carl Rovag and Orville Freeman made sure that tuition in the state was cheap. I was able to go to college, work part-time, and graduate without debt at the University of Minnesota Duluth. But you look at these kids, why would we ever stick $300 million tax on our children at the very time that they need to get their education? And you see these kids coming out of school, they can't do public participation, they can't do civic participation. They're sitting there worried about how to pay back their loans. They've got non-sustainable jobs that doesn't even provide health benefits. And we did it to them. That's wrong. This needs to be reversed.